In the winter of 1885, the grand Fifth Avenue mansion of Elena Fairchild stood as both a symbol of wealth and the stage for one of New York's darkest tragedies. Behind its polished limestone walls and glittering windows lurked secrets so dangerous that the city's most powerful men would do anything to keep them buried. What began as a widow's attempt to honor her husband's memory spiraled into a nightmare of conspiracy murder and madness that consumed Elena's life. The official record dismissed her death as hysteria-driven suicide, but letters recently uncovered in a demolished Wall Street building reveal a far more sinister truth, one that shows how Gilded Age fortunes were built on orchestrated death and how the woman who dared to expose it was silenced. Before we unravel the fate of Elena Fairchild, take a moment to subscribe and share in the comments what city or state you're listening from. We love connecting with our community of mystery enthusiasts. The real story doesn't begin with Elena's tragic end, but with the final evening of her husband's life. New York City in 1885 was the glittering heart of America's Gilded Age, where opulent mansions rose along Fifth Avenue, while immigrant families struggled in overcrowded tenements just blocks away. Wall Street thrummed with the power of railroad barons, steel magnates, and banking dynasties whose wealth rivaled European royalty. Among them stood Theodore Fairchild, a financier whose uncanny instincts earned him the title the Oracle of Exchange Place. Rivals whispered that his ability to profit from others' misfortunes bordered on the supernatural. At 45, his empire stretched from railroads and mines to manufacturing, and his word could sway markets overnight. In 1878, Theodore married Eleanor Catherine Brennan, the daughter of a modest Boston merchant. Renamed Elena, in society, she quickly became one of New York's most admired hostesses. Her intelligence and elegance perfectly matched Theodore's ambition, and together, they cultivated influence through glittering soirees and charitable works that brought them into the orbit of America's most powerful men. Their marriage, though arranged, blossomed into a true partnership. Theodore often sought her insight, while she developed a keen understanding of the business world, though careful never to overstep the limits society placed on women. Their mansion at 847 Fifth Avenue embodied their success. Designed in the French Second Empire style, it boasted marble staircases, gilded salons, and priceless art. Its crown jewel was Theodore's private study, a wood-paneled sanctuary, guarded by a massive safe where his most guarded secrets lay. Though Elena respected his privacy, she sensed the weight of the power he wielded. They had no children, a quiet sorrow between them, but their shared devotion to wealth, duty, and status seemed to fill the void. The New York of 1885 was a city of contrasts. Lavish feasts in gilded halls set against strikes, poverty, and industrial disasters. The Brooklyn Bridge had just proclaimed American ingenuity, yet the lives of workers remained precarious. In this fragile balance, men like Theodore Fairchild controlled not just fortunes, but destinies. What Elena could not have known was the terrible price behind her husband's success. On November 17, 1885, she prepared for one of their regular business dinners. The table gleamed with crystal and silver. The kitchen buzzed with roasted duck and imported oysters, and Theodore's favorite Charlotte Russe waited for dessert. These gatherings were far more than dinners. They were councils of power. That night's guests included Heiress in Kensington, the silver-haired banker who dominated railroad finance, Marcus Cromwell, a sharp-featured shipping magnate, and James Wright, the young heir to a textile empire. Elena had hosted them many times, and she knew Theodore commanded their deference like a general leading his lieutenants. But that evening, something was different. The usual lively banter carried a sharp undercurrent of unease. During the soup course, Elena caught fragments of hushed exchanges, cryptic mentions of the Pittsburgh situation, and references to the problem that needed to be resolved permanently. When Elena tried to join the conversation with a light remark about society gossip, the table fell into an uncomfortable silence that made her cheeks burn. Theodore, usually attentive to her presence, seemed pale and distracted, his hands trembling as he lifted his wine glass. Sweat dotted his forehead, despite the chill of the November night. When she asked softly if he was unwell, he brushed it off as the strain of a difficult business negotiation. But the haunted look in his eyes unsettled her. The dinner moved forward with increasing tension. The men's voices dropped to near whispers whenever sensitive matters arose, leaving Elena excluded from discussions where she had once been welcomed. The sensation of being a stranger in her own dining room cut deeply. Then, as dessert was served, everything changed. Theodore had just lifted a spoonful of his favorite Charlotte Russe when he gasped, his face twisting in agony. The spoon clattered to the plate as he clutched his chest, his breath ragged and shallow. Elena rushed toward him, but before she could reach his side, he collapsed forward, sending crystals shattering across the floor, the spilled wine blooming on the tablecloth like blood. Her scream echoed through the mansion as she knelt beside him. Theodore's wide, terrified eyes met hers, his lips moving in desperate silence until only a ghastly wheeze escaped. Heiress in Kensington barked orders, dispatching Marcus Cromwell for the family physician and directing servants to clear the room. James Wright gently steered Elena away, murmuring assurances that Dr. Henley would arrive soon. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Purcell Henley entered with his black bag and a mask of professional gravity. Elena stood in the doorway trembling as he examined Theodore's still form. After what felt like an eternity, he straightened and declared, "I'm afraid Mr. Fairchild has passed away. Given his recent chest pains and the strain of his work, this appears to be a fatal heart attack." The words shattered her world. The man who had been her partner, her protector, her great love was gone without warning, without a final goodbye. Through her tears, she dimly registered the brisk efficiency with which the men moved to arrange matters. Their swiftness felt almost indecent, but grief kept her silent. She did not see the quick glances traded between the guests, nor notice Dr. Henley's discreet nod when Kensington whispered in his ear. She failed to catch Cromwell slipping away with Theodore's wine glass and plate, or the butler clearing the table with suspicious haste at Wright's signal. In the days that followed, New York's newspapers framed Theodore's death as the cautionary tale of a brilliant financier, undone by the pressures of high finance. Friends and rivals alike sent condolences praising his genius and lamenting his loss. Yet Elena could not forget the terror in her husband's eyes or the strange unease that clung to that final evening. Something was wrong, though she could not yet name it. Weeks after the funeral, she found herself submerged in a world of legal documents and financial obligations that had always been Theodore's domain. Guided by his lawyer, the dignified Cornelius Dalton, she learned that her husband's empire was far greater than she had realized. Railroads, mines, factories, shipping lines, banks, even newspapers all bore Theodore's signature. Paperwork piled high, stock certificates, bonds, contracts, letters from associates across the country. Each demanded her approval. But what disturbed her most was the timing of Theodore's dealings. Again and again, she discovered investments made just before catastrophe struck his competitors. He sold railroad stock days before a derailment ruined the line's reputation. He bought into mines just before rival operations suffered deadly cave-ins. He invested heavily in shipping firms just before competing vessels met with mysterious disasters. At first, she attributed these coincidences to his uncanny instincts. Theodore had always seemed to see further than others. Yet as she pored over the records, a chilling pattern emerged. The precision was too exact, the luck too perfect. It was as if Theodore had known in advance when disaster would strike. Then, while exploring his study, Elena discovered a locked drawer she had never seen opened. When the locksmith finally forced open the drawer, Elena discovered documents that shattered everything she believed about her husband's business. Inside were meticulously clipped newspaper articles on train derailments, industrial accidents, and the sudden deaths of rival businessmen, each one dated and annotated in Theodore's neat hand. Even more alarming were coded telegrams and cryptic letters signed only with initials. They spoke in vague but chilling terms about resolving problems and permanent solutions, language that felt less like business and more like a blueprint for orchestrated disasters. One letter dated just 3 weeks before Theodore's death seized her attention. Written on fine paper without letterhead and signed simply HK. It discussed the Pittsburgh problem she recalled hearing at that fateful dinner. It assured Theodore that our associate understands the urgency and referenced a substantial payment for services rendered. Her heart pounded as she stared at the signature. Heiress and Kensington. Could the very man who had comforted her in grief be orchestrating such horrors? Obsessed Elena spent long winter nights in Theodore's study charting timelines that linked his investments with disasters. Each revelation deepened the pattern railroads sold off just before derailments, mines acquired days before cave-ins, shipping companies backed just before rivals met catastrophe. The coincidences were too perfect. It wasn't luck, it was sabotage. But her growing obsession left her increasingly isolated. Former friends now treated her with unease, and conversations froze when she entered a room. At charity galas, eyes averted and whispers followed. Even Dr. Henley, who had pronounced Theodore dead, began visiting often under the guise of concern. His questions probed uncomfortably into her activities, warning her that dwelling on business might damage her delicate constitution. His tone carried undertones that unsettled her deeply. Worse still, Elena began to feel watched. Strange servants appeared on Fifth Avenue, their eyes lingering on her every step. Papers in the study shifted position when she was away, as though unseen hands had rifled through them. What had begun as suspicion grew into a suffocating certainty. Someone was monitoring her. By spring of 1886, her grief had hardened into determination. She no longer questioned whether Theodore's death was natural. She was convinced it was murder. The only question now was how far the conspiracy reached and how much danger she herself was in. Her first real breakthrough came from an unlikely ally, Margaret O'Brien, the Fairchild cook of 6 years, whose loyalty had never wavered. One April morning, Margaret approached nervously as Elena studied documents in the breakfast room. "Beg pardon, ma'am," she began in her soft Dublin accent, twisting her apron in her hands. "But there's something I saw the night Mr. Theodore passed. I can't keep it to myself no longer." Elena froze, urging her to continue. Margaret's voice trembled. "I was in the kitchen when Dr. Henley left. I saw him at the garden gate speaking with Mr. Kensington. They didn't know I was watching, but I heard him say clear as day. The dose was perfect. No one will ever suspect." And Dr. Henley replied, "Just remember our agreement about the widow. She must never learn what we know." Then they shook hands like men sealing a bargain. The words struck Elena like a blow. If Margaret's account was true, Theodore had been poisoned, his death disguised as a heart attack, and the very doctor who had declared him dead had helped arrange it. Elena's grief hardened into fury as she grasped the truth. The very men who had comforted her after Theodore's death were his killers. With Margaret's revelation and the damning documents in hand, she began to reinterpret every detail of that night. Dr. Henley's suspiciously swift arrival, the guests' uncanny efficiency as they managed the crisis, their strained composure throughout dinner. It had all been part of a carefully rehearsed plan. Her investigation deepened as she quietly gathered information about the men who had sat around her table that November evening. The picture that emerged was chilling. Heiress and Kensington's fortune swelled through railroad investments that always seemed to profit from mysterious collapses of rival lines. Marcus Cromwell's shipping empire grew through fires, accidents, and bankruptcies that forced competitors to sell. James Wright's textile dynasty expanded as rival mill owners perished in freak accidents or suicides. Different industries, the same pattern misfortune for others, profit for them. The conclusion was inescapable. These men were not merely shrewd businessmen. They were predators operating a murder-for-profit machine. Theodore, with his brilliant mind for timing and numbers, had been a key strategist. His genius was not foresight, but orchestration. Every perfectly timed investment, every uncanny market decision had been purchased in blood. And now, Nina understood the true cost of her wealth and her life of luxury. It had been built on murder. As her understanding grew, so did her isolation. Invitations dried up, friends drifted away, and whispers followed her through ballrooms and church pews. More ominously, her movements were being monitored. Papers in her study were disturbed. Unfamiliar servants appeared in her home, vouched for by agencies linked to Kensington's office. Letters she wrote were tampered with their responses, betraying knowledge of thoughts she had never committed to the page. The psychological siege wore her down. Nights brought no rest. She lay awake, listening to every creak of the house, expecting footsteps outside her door. Dr. Henley, once the model of professional concern, began visiting too often. His examinations grew intrusive, his questions sharper. He pressed the idea of a sanitarium, warning that her delicate mind might not withstand her grief. The threat was clear: submit quietly to their plans, or be declared insane and locked away forever. By the summer of 1886, Nina knew the conspiracy reached far beyond Kensington, Cromwell, and Wright. Judges, police officials, newspaper editors, even members of the Board of Health were implicated. What she had stumbled upon was not a circle of greedy men, but a vast criminal enterprise that had shaped New York's markets for over a decade. The final proof emerged from a hidden compartment in Theodore's office safe. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger written entirely in his hand. It was not a journal, but a ledger of death. Each entry listed a target, a justification, the method of elimination, the payment, and the profit. A railroad executive, Thomas Crawford, resolved by a carriage accident, yielding $180,000 in stock gains. A shipping magnate, Robert Sinclair, addressed through apparent suicide, securing 3 profitable trade routes. A textile manufacturer, William Hayes, concluded by a factory fire that claimed his life, and 17 workers generating more than $200,000 in payouts and acquisitions. Worst of all, the ledger revealed the existence of a network of professional killers operating across the Northeast. Their work had been camouflaged as bad luck industrial accidents or personal despair. But in truth, every coincidence had been an execution ordered and paid for. Nina closed the ledger with shaking hands, her mind racing. She now held the proof of a conspiracy that spanned industries, cities, and institutions. But she also knew what it meant if these men had killed to build their empires. They would not hesitate to destroy the one person who could expose them. The ledger described the killers only by numbers, each with a distinct specialty. Agent 7 staged carriage accidents. Agent 12 engineered industrial disasters and fires. Agent 23 mastered poisons that left no trace. Theodore Nina realized had been the strategist, the one who analyzed competitors, identified vulnerabilities, and determined the most profitable moment to strike. Kensington handled finances and laundering. Cromwell coordinated the logistics of death, and Wright maintained the network of corrupt officials who guaranteed that investigations ended before they truly began. Her blood ran cold as she reached the final pages. The last completed entry dated November 10, 1885. just 1 week before Theodore's collapse, involved the elimination of a Pittsburgh steel magnate whose factories threatened Wright's business. But it was the unfinished note below that made her hands tremble. E.F. Widow, excessive curiosity. Permanent resolution required. The initials left no doubt. Elena Fairchild had become the next target. Terror mingled with resolve. Now she understood the true purpose of Dr. Henley's constant visits and his whispered concerns about her fragile nerves. Her fate was already written. She would be declared insane, locked away, and her eventual death explained as suicide brought on by grief. Almost immediately, the campaign against her escalated. A chandelier crashed to the floor minutes after she passed beneath it. A gas leak in her bedroom was caught only because Margaret noticed the faint hiss and odor before Elena retired for the night. A carriage wheel snapped on Fifth Avenue, nearly overturning her onto the cobblestones. Each accident could be dismissed as misfortune, but the timing was too precise. They weren't trying to kill her outright, not yet. They were rehearsing, testing methods. The effect was unbearable. She could no longer trust the food she ate, the servants in her home, or the very walls around her. Every sound in the mansion became suspect, every shadow a threat. Dr. Henley's visits grew darker in tone. He began arriving with a colleague, Dr. Reginald Steinberg, a man notorious for his work in nervous disorders and institutional commitments. Together they subjected her to invasive interrogations. Their questions thinly veiled accusations. Did she believe people were plotting against her? Did she imagine conspiracies among her late husband's associates? Was she struggling to distinguish reality from delusion? The trap was clear. They were building a case to declare her insane. Once committed to a private asylum, her credibility would vanish, her freedom would end, and her death would come quietly, another widow, undone by grief. The thought of confinement in one of those grim institutions, with their brutal treatments for hysteria, horrified her more than death itself. Just when it seemed the nightmare could not grow darker, Elena realized the game had entered its final stage. The net was tightening, and if she could not act soon, she would vanish as completely as her husband's victims. And if this story has you shivering, imagine living under that kind of terror. Share this with someone who loves unraveling the darkest mysteries, because Elena Fairchild's nightmare was only beginning. Hit that like button to support our work, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Now let's uncover the next chapter in Elena Fairchild's desperate fight for survival. Her grief had hardened into determination, but desperation now drove her every move. If she was to survive, she needed proof so overwhelming that even the most powerful conspirators couldn't suppress it. Her plan was bold: gather irrefutable evidence, make multiple copies, and release them simultaneously to federal authorities, independent newspapers, and law enforcement outside New York's corrupt system. Working in secret, Elena photographed pages of Theodore's ledger with a small camera she had acquired discreetly. She wrote detailed accounts of everything she had uncovered, including Margaret's testimony about the whispered bargain between Dr. Henley and Kensington. She mapped out timelines of suspicious deaths that aligned perfectly with sudden financial windfalls, showing the systematic nature of the killings. She created 4 complete sets of documentation: photographs, transcripts, letters, and analysis. 3 would go to trusted contacts. The 4th she planned to lock in a safety deposit box, far from the conspirators' reach. To the outside world, she maintained the mask of a widow unraveling under grief. She attended society events, submitted to Dr. Henley's intrusive examinations, and played the role of a woman slipping into exhaustion. But beneath the facade, she was preparing for the most dangerous day of her life. By October of 1886, the tension had reached a breaking point. Elena arranged 3 crucial meetings for the same day, a federal prosecutor specializing in interstate commerce at 10 a.m. The editor of the Herald Tribune, one of the few major papers not owned by the conspirators, at 2 p.m., and a Philadelphia detective untainted by New York's corruption at 5 p.m. If her plan worked, she would unleash the truth faster than the conspirators could contain it. On the morning of October 8th, she rose early, dressing with deliberate care, knowing it might be the last day she walked free, or the last day she lived at all. But as she prepared to leave for her first appointment, Margaret rushed in, her face pale with alarm. "Ma'am," she whispered urgently, "2 strange men are posted on the corners outside. And Dr. Henley's here. He came without warning. He says you've had some kind of attack and insists on seeing you right away. He's in the front parlor now, with that other doctor. He keeps checking his watch. But you look perfectly fine to me, and something about his manner, it's not right." Elena's pulse quickened. The net had closed. The men outside, the sudden arrival of Henley and Steinberg, it could mean only one thing. They knew. Her carefully laid plan had been discovered, and the conspirators were moving swiftly to stop her. If she allowed herself to be taken under the pretense of medical care, she would never see freedom again. Her evidence would vanish, her voice silenced forever. In that moment she understood with icy clarity she had seconds to choose. Stay and be erased. Run and gamble everything on a single desperate chance at survival. Rather than confront Dr. Henley directly, Elena instructed Margaret to inform him she felt faint and needed a few moments to recover before her examination. While Henley waited in the parlor, glancing impatiently at his watch, Elena slipped away through the servants' stairwell, clutching her carefully prepared evidence. She exited the mansion through the rear alley, vanishing into the narrow artery that led to 48th Street, her escape as swift and silent as breath in cold air. What followed was a frantic race through the streets of Manhattan, a flight for her life. As she weaved through the crowds, she could see them men trailing her from a distance, never close enough to grab her, but never letting her out of sight. They weren't random. They were coordinated, informed, and already one step ahead. Her appointments had been compromised. The first blow came at the Federal Building. Breathless and flushed with panic, Elena asked for Prosecutor Williams. The clerk at the desk barely met her gaze. "He's been called away. Emergency. No idea when he'll return." The answer was too clean, too rehearsed. Still, she left the evidence with him, her voice trembling as she demanded it be delivered. But as she turned to leave, she knew in her gut it would be discarded the moment she stepped out the door. Her 2 p.m. meeting at the Herald Tribune went no better. The editor, Morrison, had supposedly fallen ill that very morning and been admitted to the hospital. No one could or would tell her which one. The staff offered her polite condolences, then ushered her away like a confused beggar at the gates of power. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. The conspiracy's reach was broader than she had feared. Her enemies controlled the narrative, the news, the very air she breathed. Still, she clung to hope. Her final meeting, scheduled at 5 p.m., in the open bustle of Grand Central Station, was with Detective Patrick Kelly, a seasoned investigator from Philadelphia, far from New York's infected corridors of power. She arrived early, scanning every face in the crowd for danger, clutching the last remaining packet of evidence like a lifeline. And then she saw him. Detective Kelly stood near the departure board, hands in his coat pockets. But when their eyes met, her hope collapsed. His expression wasn't neutral, it was cold, suspicious, controlled. And his first words destroyed the last sliver of safety she had left. "Mrs. Fairchild," he said flatly, "I've been contacted by some very concerned parties about your condition. Dr. Henley's filled me in." The words struck her like a slap. She didn't need to hear more to know he'd been compromised. Bribed, manipulated, or lied to. It didn't matter how. He was no longer her ally. "Detective, please," she said, voice taut with panic. The evidence I have proves everything my husband and his partners have orchestrated, murders for profit. There's a ledger. I can show you. I can prove he was poisoned. I'm not mad. I'm telling you the truth." Kelly's face softened, but not with understanding. It was the pitying calm of a man speaking to someone he'd already dismissed as broken. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you've been under a lot of strain. Dr. Henley explained your condition. He's waiting outside now with a medical team. You'll be taken to a private facility where you can rest and get the help you need." Her mind reeled. The trap had been set, and she'd walked directly into it. Every step she had taken, they had anticipated. Every move had been countered. Now, standing beneath the vaulted ceiling of Grand Central Station, surrounded by the indifferent tide of passers-by, Elena Fairchild understood she had been outmaneuvered. The ambulance waiting outside wasn't rescue, it was erasure. She had only moments left and a single terrible decision to make. In that moment of soul-crushing despair, Elena made her final desperate choice. She would not vanish quietly into the machine built to erase her. If she was going to die, then the world would hear her scream. With a sudden burst of violence, she tore herself from Detective Kelly's grip and ran headlong into the crowded main concourse of Grand Central Station. "They killed my husband," she shouted, her voice cracking through the cathedral-like space. "Harrison Kensington and Marcus Cromwell are murderers. They've been killing people for money." Heads turned. Commuters froze. The elegant woman in black silk screaming accusations of murder became the epicenter of a spectacle. Elena's voice rose over the hum of trains and murmuring crowds. "Dr. Henley, poison Theodore. They're trying to kill me because I know the truth." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some stepped closer, others backed away. But all watched. The chaos was exactly what the conspirators had planned. Dr. Henley appeared seemingly summoned by her cries, flanked by two large men in white coats. Their calm, clinical demeanor stood in stark contrast to Elena's frantic, trembling form. "Please stand back," Henley called to the gathering crowd, his voice rich with concern. "This poor woman has been suffering from severe nervous exhaustion. Since the loss of her husband, she's experienced vivid delusions, dangerous ones." The orderlies moved in swiftly, practiced and cold. Elena fought them with everything she had, her voice ragged with fury and fear. "They've built a network of killers. There's a ledger. It's all written down. They're murdering their competitors for profit." But the more she struggled, the more her words, despite their truth, sounded like madness to the crowd. Her sobs, her hysteria, her claims of secret assassins and forged medical reports, each became evidence in the case against her sanity. In the eyes of the onlookers, she was a woman broken by grief, unraveling in public. As the orderlies dragged her toward the waiting ambulance, Elena saw him, Harrison Kensington, watching from the shadows near the station entrance. His expression was one of cold satisfaction, the look of a man witnessing the final act of a play he had written in advance. This was the end. He had engineered her isolation, the staged accidents, the psychiatric trap, and now this very public breakdown. And then came the final betrayal. As the ambulance doors were pulled shut, Elena saw Detective Kelly. He was no longer pretending. He stood just beyond the crowd, shaking hands with Dr. Henley, accepting an envelope thick with cash. That was the moment her last hope died. Elena Catherine Fairchild was officially committed to the Westchester Private Sanitarium on October 8, 1886, under the authority of Dr. Purcell Henley and Dr. Reginald Steinberg. Nestled deep in a remote part of Westchester County, the institution catered to wealthy families looking to discreetly remove their problems from the public eye. There, Eleanor became a footnote in her own story. The sanitarium's records, meticulously typed and signed in neat ink, described her as suffering from acute paranoid hysteria brought on by grief and nervous collapse. Her delusions of murder and conspiracy were dismissed as textbook symptoms of a fragile female mind overcome by trauma. Her treatment followed the accepted practices of the time: cold baths, forced sedation, and long periods of isolation. No one questioned her incarceration. No journalist investigated her claims. No judge reviewed her case. And no one ever asked what had become of the woman who once hosted the most powerful men in America at her glittering Fifth Avenue mansion. Alela Nena was confined to a private room deep within the Westchester Sanitarium. She was denied all outside contact, no visitors, no letters, no appeals. Her days were regimented under the guise of therapy, cold water treatments, enforced bed rest, and steadily increasing doses of opiates meant to sedate her into silence. Every request to contact the authorities was denied by Dr. Henley, who insisted that such activity would only reinforce her delusional paranoia. Margaret O'Brien, the one person who still fought for her, tried repeatedly to visit. Each time she was turned away with cold reassurances. Alela Nena was too unstable, too dangerous, too fragile. Margaret's persistence eventually earned her a brief audience with Dr. Henley himself, who calmly explained that Alela Nena's condition had worsened rapidly and that any outside influence might trigger a violent episode. What Margaret didn't realize was that she had just signed her own death warrant. Exactly 1 month after Alela Nena's commitment, on November 15, 1886, Margaret O'Brien was found dead in her small tenement apartment, not far from the Fairchild Mansion. The official cause was listed as a gas leak from a faulty stove. A tragic accident, the police said. Just bad luck. But the timing was perfect. Margaret, the only living witness to the conversation between Dr. Henley and Heiress in Kensington, was silenced forever. Alela Nena's own fate came with cold clinical precision. On December 3rd, after nearly 2 months of forced confinement and high-dose sedation, she was found dead in her bed at the sanitarium. Dr. Henley's report attributed her death to cardiac failure brought on by the progressive deterioration of the nervous system and emotional strain. The official certificate signed by Henley and countersigned by Dr. Steinberg said nothing about the massive morphine dose that had stopped her heart. The drugs had been administered during what the records described as a therapeutic calming procedure. In truth, it was the final act of a meticulously planned execution, death by prescription delivered behind locked doors and veiled in medical authority. Her funeral was a quiet affair. A handful of servants and a few polite society figures came to pay their respects. Heiress in Kensington, Marcus Cromwell, and James Wainwright all attended. They offered carefully crafted condolences, playing their roles as sympathetic friends, mourning the sad decline of a once prominent widow. Their performances were flawless faces, touched with just enough sorrow to conceal the relief beneath. The New York Times ran a brief obituary. It framed Alela Nena as a tragic example of female fragility, broken by grief lost to madness. Her claims of murder, her insistence on conspiracy, were chalked up to hysteria. Dr. Henley was praised for his valiant efforts to help a woman so deeply unmoored by the sudden loss of her beloved husband. The obituary ended with a line that chilled the bone. Some illnesses lie beyond even modern science. Alela Nena's estate was quickly settled by Theodore's lawyer, Cornelius Dalton. The Fairchild fortune, over $2 million, was divided according to instructions laid out long before her death. Kensington's bank received significant deposits. Cromwell acquired shipping assets at bargain prices. Wright absorbed textile holdings that expanded his empire. The mansion at 847 Fifth Avenue was sold to a railroad magnate from Chicago. All of Theodore's personal and business records were ordered destroyed. Dalton explained that they contained sensitive financial material that, if made public, could unfairly damage the reputations of respected men. Heiress in Kensington personally supervised the destruction, ensuring that every trace of the assassination ledger, every coded letter, every whisper of the conspiracy vanished into ash and smoke. And so, with Elena Fairchild's death, the machine turned on. Polished, oiled, more confident than ever. The network of murder for profit she had fought to expose continued to operate in silence, unpunished, unchallenged, and unseen. The elimination of both Theodore Fairchild and his widow was more than a cover-up. It was a demonstration. A brutal, calculated message to anyone within the organization who might ever consider disobedience. The murder-for-profit network had proven it could silence internal threats with surgical precision, all while preserving the public images of its architects as respected men of wealth, philanthropy, and vision. In the years that followed, the conspiracy expanded its reach first through the Northeast, then into the booming industrial heart of the Midwest. Their methods evolved, but the core remained the same. Eliminate the competition, control the narrative, and protect the operation at all costs. Dr. Purcell Henley, far from disgraced, rose to greater prominence. The Fairchild case was held up as a model of clinical intervention. His reputation for treating the paranoid delusions of affluent women earned him wealth and celebrity within elite circles. His private sanitariums gained a grim prestige, especially in cases where female patients required discreet long-term care. His success rate was praised. His patients, however, often didn't live long enough to be interviewed. The Westchester Private Sanitarium remained in operation for another 15 years, quietly absorbing the inconvenient, the problematic, and the too curious. In 1902, a conveniently timed fire destroyed its records in their entirety. No accountability, no trace, no names. By the early 20th century, most of the original conspirators had died peacefully in their beds, celebrated with obituaries that praised their contributions to the American dream. Heiress in Kensington was eulogized as a generous philanthropist. Marcus Cromwell's shipping empire was credited with advancing international commerce. James Wainwright was hailed as a pioneer of industrial employment. Their graves stood tall, carved in marble, their legacies sealed in history books written by those who never asked too many questions. But their true legacy was darker. They left behind blueprints, methods that would outlive them. Bribed officials, sanitariums as tools of silence, assassinations disguised as misfortune. These tactics became the backbone of corporate and criminal collusion for decades to come. The conspiracy did not die. It simply changed names, changed faces, and adapted. And Elena Fairchild. Her name faded into obscurity. She was remembered, if at all, in dusty academic footnotes about female hysteria in the Gilded Age. Her story misinterpreted, her evidence lost, her warnings ignored. The brave woman who risked everything to expose a hidden empire of murder was reduced to a cautionary tale about grief and madness, an object of pity, not admiration. But we remember her differently. Elena's tragedy reveals how power, when unchecked, can corrupt even the institutions designed to protect us. Her story reminds us that the greatest horrors in history are not the work of monsters, but of ordinary men cloaked in wealth, influence, and impunity. Men who decide they are above the law and then reshape the world to make it true. So now we ask you, what do you think? Could such conspiracies have operated in the shadows of America's Gilded Age? Could they still? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Elena Fairchild's fate and the terrifying truth buried in this forgotten chapter of history. And if this tale of historical horror gave you chills, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell, so you never miss another story of sinister secrets hidden in America's past. Until next time, remember, the scariest stories are the ones that just might be true.
Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.